Before we once again plunge into some Irish horror, this video is sponsored by Raycon because, you know what, if you want to experience my accent in all its glorious however's, Raycon's everyday E25 earbuds is the best way to do so. Practical, cute, affordable, and absolutely comfortable, I use these bad boys all the time when listening to music, audiobooks, and podcasts, and it's thanks to their lightweight feel, seamless Bluetooth pairing, and 6 hours of playtime, they give me a perfect excuse to get away from my screen, especially during these last few stressful months. Their non-intrusive compact design and noise-isolating fit genuinely makes it easy to just instantly put in and escape the isolation of working all day and take on healthier habits while absorbing some leisure and escapism. Most nights I just connect them to my iPad and throw on an episode of How Did This Get Made, and despite noisily cooking, washing, or vacuuming the house, I'm completely immersed in what I'm listening to, as Raycons provide crisp clarity and quality bass without paying an unholy high price. Raycon has a 45-day free return policy if you feel they're not for you, so with no risk, click the link in the description box below or go to buyraycon.com/Ryan to get 15% off your order. And most of all, by doing so, you'll also be helping my channel immensely, so thank you for your continued support, and thank you to Raycon for sponsoring horror content that's getting trickier to tackle on YouTube. Alright, so I know I said in my Grabbers video that the whole lockdown situation made the idea of covering a grim, isolating horror like The Hallow a bit too depressing. Well, after the positive response that video received, and the fact that I just covered another grim, isolating horror anyway, I felt compelled to just continue battering my way through the overwhelming sense of doom to talk about it. 2015's The Hallow is my all-time favourite Irish horror movie, but to be fair, it's not like there's really much competition. You would think, given Ireland's rich history of folk tales, ancient mythology, and the never-ending real-world fight for peace, there would be a lot more Irish horror movies out there. The problem is, if you want to make a high-concept movie exclusive to Ireland, it becomes a bit tricky manoeuvring the culture mandate of local funding bodies that, a lot of the time, you've got to rely on outside productions to co-finance such risky, non-conventional projects. While on the surface, The Hallow is a dark and tragic fairy tale about the morals of trespassing and disturbing peaceful land, writer-director Corin Hardy's colourfully twisted homage to early visual effects and creature cinema, such as the work of Ray Harryhausen, is just as infectiously fun, as he openly embraces his childhood nostalgia and gets right to the heart of what makes the horror within these fairy tales so permanently compelling.
Mr. Hitchens, this isn't London. Things here go bumping in and out.
Interestingly, the film actually premiered at Sundance the same week as Robert Eggers' The Witch, which also harboured an intense passion for authentic folklore, and thus both films make for a clear stylistic contrast in how to approach narratives that blend myth with reality. The Witch became known for being this historically pure and symbolically deep dive into New England superstition, to the point it was alienating with most mainstream audiences, whereas The Hallow was more playful with its material, as it indulged in its practical influences, while still respecting much of the mythology, if indeed it's pretty surface level about what it shows and tells, and takes many creative liberties with the intricacies of the Irish myths. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way. It keeps the film focused and thrilling, while the dangerous presence of the forest is left just mysterious enough that it's still perpetually threatening right to the very end. Corin Hardy stated that The Hallow was pitched as Straw Dogs meets Pan's Labyrinth. He wanted to ground the fantasy in reality akin to the work of Guillermo del Toro, and maintain the perception of the outsider which is prevalent to the story in Straw Dogs. The Hallow is not based on any specific story, more so it's a broad retelling of tales about innocent if ignorant people inadvertently disturbing an ancient entity deep within a forest and soon find themselves running for their lives as the insidious creatures breach the safety of their home. It focuses on a young English couple from London who move to Ireland after the husband Adam takes a job to study and survey the local woods before it's sold off and deforested, until one of the townsfolk warns the couple that creatures known simply as the Hallow will attempt to steal their newborn baby if they do not leave. As a result, the emotional core of the story is about two parents desperately trying to protect their child as these seemingly unstoppable horrid creatures attack. Yet, what becomes most striking is the implications of the lore itself, which ignites a feeling of grim inevitability that not everyone will make it out of this alive. There is an offsetting calmness to the way The Hallow begins. We get a montage of County Galway's beautiful untouched land where, strangely, the looming threat doesn't come just from the Hallow itself, but also the couple, as they arrive at a place that refuses to let them call it home. Despite keeping to themselves, they are immediately outcast from the beginning, as Adam examines and marks the forest for research, while being dismissive of the local superstitions he's intruding upon, as Claire dismantles barriers eventually revealed to be designed to ward off danger from entering their house. Now, what is this danger exactly? Well, we learn that the Hallow are banshees and changelings, summarised by the Belfast-born Garda officer as baby stealers.
A conquered people, forever in hiding, driven from their sacred lands by man with iron and fire.
Beautifully told.
According to the Irish Post, the Banshee is a harbinger of death and doom, serving as a signal that death is forthcoming and inescapable, whereas changelings are creatures left in place of stolen babies, tricking the parents into thinking it's still their child, when their actual child, in the context of the film at least, become parts of the Hallow. As my Irish history educated friend perfectly summarised, think of Irish mythology as condensed into one simple rule: don't fuck with fairies or they will batter you to pieces. However, at the same time, Corin Hardy wanted to downplay the fantasy elements as much as possible and synergise them with real nature to give them a feeling of believability. As such, when Adam begins his research, he discovers a strange fungus killing the wildlife that he believes to be a strain of cordyceps, which he then describes as the Trojan horse of parasitic fungi, as it has the ability to infiltrate the brain of its host and control it into spreading its disease. It serves to establish that the Hallow has the ability to infect its victims into transforming into creatures themselves, as Adam is soon poked in the eye after the initial attack, and his body goes through a grisly mutation where he begins to lose his humanity as the night goes on. It cements a pretty clear meaning to the audience. It is the forest that's controlling everything. It is a living, breathing creature with the ability to spread its influence, and it taps perfectly into what I think is an unspoken secrecy about Irish forests. As the Garda said during the previous clip, the Hallow were driven from their sacred land, and it seems to vaguely compare itself to Ireland's history of invasions that have corrupted peace and purity, hence the constant hostility towards outsiders who disturb the forest. It actually ties into the Book of Invasions, or translated as the Book of the Taking of Ireland, quoted in the opening. It's given to the couple by one of the locals as a warning of what will happen if the Hallow is disturbed, and in real life, it's basically an old 11th century collection of poems and stories about Ireland's mythological history that involved it being conquered by several different groups during its early years. In fact, the Garda even describes the Hallow as good people, and it helps reinforce my feelings that the forest is not inherently evil, but rather it's a place that's transformed into a negative energy in order to defend and preserve what remains of that purity. It simply wants outsiders to keep out and leave it in peace, and when trespassers arrive, its line of defense is to make the intruders an internal part of it, and since it steals their baby, and as we all know in folklore, babies are typically symbolic of innocence, it's a means of rejuvenation. Although the opening radio chatter does suggest the broader significance of forests as symbols of freedom and tranquility, that's gradually withering away in a world that's become so man-made, and land is now something to be bought and commercialized rather than protected and treasured. After all, the point of Adam's work as a conservationist is to study the land before it gets sold to a private firm, where it will inevitably lose its essence. One of the great things about Ireland is that even in a big city, just looking into the distance, nature still dominates and invites you to escape the pressures of modernity, and the couple themselves even begin to realise this as they wish to find peace as well. The thing about the couple is that they are not bad people or mean to cause harm. It's just an unfortunate factor that Adam's work ironically hurts them, because despite his love and curiosity for nature, he represents the calm before the storm, so to speak, considering after he leaves, in comes the new owners to destroy and corrupt this sacred land. The Hallow calls attention to this really profound dichotomy with forests, because they're the perfect horror setting as we associate them with being lost, disorientated, and claustrophobic, but I, like I'm sure many others, grew up perceiving forests as harmonious because as a child, going there with my family was both adventurous and exciting. If by now I've convinced you to watch The Hallow, please do support the film, because I'm going to end on a final note that will give away the conclusion to its characters, but I think it beautifully consolidates the concept of its horror. I think the story conveys the destruction of harmony, or rather how evil enacted upon the undeserving perpetuates further tragedy and pain as its corruption spreads. But I feel its somber closure is carried by a feeling of bittersweet acceptance, where love still triumphs even in death. The Book of Invasions introduces a clear implication. Adam's infection is an inevitable fate, hinted at by the presence of the Banshee. He is destined to become one of the creatures, but not before saving his family and sacrificing himself to spare them a similar fate. It leaves Claire and her baby alone, but I like to think of the book's final image as the presence of Adam continuing to watch over them, as their future has now been shaped by the Hallow, and perhaps one day they will grow stronger from it. Many fairy tales live with us because the morals have a timeless truth to them, and sometimes in horror it's not about defeating the evil, but rather learning to make peace with it.